Hello everybody. This is going to be kind of a weird video. We're talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp: quANTuMANia. It's going to be weird because I'm kind of all over the place. There's a couple things I want to do in this video that aren't necessarily all related, other than they're all kind of about the movie. And like I got some notes that I'm going to go through, but they're not necessarily in order. So buckle up, strap in. It's going to get weird. Sometimes, usually, I try to get my video out pretty much as soon as I can after I've seen a movie, so it's fresh in my mind and stuff like that. I saw this movie yesterday afternoon. I had a chance to film last night, didn't, and it's now past 11 a.m. the next day, so it's not like I was rushing to get it out today. So I do feel like I've had more time to kind of formulate my thoughts on it. And also, sometimes, usually, I will try to avoid looking at other reviews, hearing what other people have to say about it until I've made my video, so that I am not influenced by other people. But, like, my thoughts on this movie just aren't that strong. So I kind of had my own headspace set and kind of had what my thoughts were. And then I went ahead and listened to a bunch of other reviews of people that I listen to. And I'll listen to more because it's been popping up on my YouTube feed, so I'll check out what other people have to say. But it's not going to influence how I feel, but I think it will give me some talking points because, like I said, I don't have super strong feelings about this movie. I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was fine. But there are some things that I liked, and there are some things that I didn't like, and there are certainly things that I think could have been done better. And I think it could have been pretty easy to make a better version of this movie, and I think I'm going to make a whole separate video about that. So certainly I don't think it was perfect or flawless, but I thought it was fine. Which leads me to one of the other weird side things I'm going to get to in this video. I've been pondering the question, is the Ant-Man trilogy the most consistent trilogy in the MCU? Not necessarily the best, but the most consistent from film to film. Because that's kind of where my headspace was yesterday, after having watched the first two Ant-Man movies, and the bits of Civil War that he's in, and the bits of Endgame that he's in. You know, my main concern wasn't whether the movie was going to be good or bad. My main concern was, is this going to be a very different type of movie than what I'm expecting? Is it going to be very different from the other Ant-Man entries, like Love and Thunder was for Thor? And I don't think it was. I think it was very much in line with what we've had before. So I think if you like the first couple Ant-Man movies, you'll probably like this one too. And so that's kind of my thoughts in a nutshell. I will be getting into spoilers later, so if you don't want to do that, maybe you can get off here, because like I said, my non-spoiler thoughts are, I was pretty well entertained. It was pretty much what I expected. I have some nitpicks, I have some complaints, I have some things that could have been better, which I'll get into, but I didn't think it was terrible by any means. So we'll call that the end of the spoiler-free section, and moving on, I'm going to be talking about all sorts of different things. So I guess first I'll just go through my notes. So I've got notes. I didn't take notes during the movie. I went back, read through the plot summary, took some notes off of that. I took notes on some things that other people have been talking about, just to give kind of my input on that. And I wrote down just some ideas I had that aren't necessarily related to plot details, just thoughts that I've had, such as about cast members that were not in this film. So I'm going to go through kind of the short version of the plot notes first, and then talk about what other people have said, and then kind of talk character by character, and then talk about, excuse me, I just hit my tripod, I'm sorry. And then talk about my kind of extra notes. And then I'm going to explore this idea of, is the Ant-Man trilogy the best? Maybe I'll save that for its own video. We'll see how long the time goes. So, very quickly going through the plot. Janet meets Kang in the quantum realm. She learns that he's evil. And then this is a nitpick, all right? And I'm fine admitting that it's a nitpick, and I can even think of an explanation for it. But we see that she uses those discs, right, to make the core grow super duper big, right? And here's my question with the discs, is that in the first Ant-Man movie, Hank Pym tells Scott Lang, the suit doesn't have any blasters, or the suit doesn't have any weapons, so I made you these discs. Which to me implies that those discs are a new invention that Hank made for Scott, which means Janet should not have those in the quantum realm. Now, it could entirely be that he just worded that strangely, right? And it could be that the suit doesn't have any weapons, so I've made these discs and you can use them while you're in the suit. I'm going to go with that because that just makes everything cleaner. But that was my first thought when seeing this backstory between Janet and King. We have Scott's uneventful life. So Cassie kind of calls Scott out for not doing anything, not helping people that need help. And it's like, that was never really Scott's deal, right? And like, you know, people talk up what he did with VistaCorp and, you know, calling out the company and stuff like that. But like, he worked for that company. So that was personal to him. It's not something that he saw elsewhere and he went and he inserted himself into that situation. That was a situation that he was a part of. Right? And then Civil War, doesn't seem like he sought out Captain America's team. It seems like they approached him and he agreed to help because they approached him about it. And then Ant-Man and the Wasp, he was in his house and Janet came and kidnapped him. So he's never been one to go out and look for trouble or look for injustice and solve that problem, right? Which is not to say that doing that is wrong, that Cassie is wrong to be doing this, but they're making it sound like she's doing the same thing that he was doing, and that's just not the case. Again, I talked about this in my last video about tracking Kang and Lang. We're never told that Scott was a thief or a burglar before the Vista job. We have no reason to believe that he was, even though he talks about it like he was. It's never come up that he's done that before. So, that's kind of weird. And like the whole Cassie thing in this movie, it's very Santa Claus 2. Is that what I'm thinking of? Where the kid is older and now he's getting in trouble because he's lashing out because he wants attention and blah, blah, blah. And like, that's not exactly what Cassie's doing. She claims she's trying to help people. But like, you have shrinking technology, right? If you want to help the homeless, if you want to help people that are hungry, I don't know if she specifies people that are hungry. I know she specifies the homeless, but like, work to develop a housing project where you can just make people smaller and then they have more space and you can make a little, you know, they've done it in the comics where they have like a dollhouse or something, right? And then it's this big mansion when you just shrink people down. Get something like that going. Or if you want to help feed people, get small amounts. They do it in this movie with the pizza. Get small amounts of food and make it bigger. There are ways to help people without antagonizing the police. And that's not to say that you should never antagonize the police or that that's always... But like, it seems like she's using these people suffering as justification to rebel and get into trouble because she likes getting into trouble. That's the vibe that I got. Maybe that's just me, but it, you know, there are plenty of ways that you can help people without putting yourself in illegal situations. So that's kind of weird. And then, you know, there's the whole thing where she's been in jail twice now. By the time she's 18, and it's like, nobody ever says it. I expected somebody to say it, but it's like, Scott can't, like, get on her too much because he was in jail, right? And he went to jail for doing the right thing. And she's supposedly kind of sort of doing the right thing. But it's like, you can still have that conversation and have Scott be like, you know, look, I thought I did what I was right, but I still made a mistake, and it still messed up my life. And look at how much time I missed out with you. I don't want you doing the same things that I did. You can still have that conversation, and they just don't have it at all. Everybody's just on Cassie's side, except for Scott, but then Scott's on Cassie's side too, so it's weird. And like, I thought the actress playing Cassie did fine, but it's the first time we've seen her as Cassie, and this is the third version of Cassie that we've seen now. So like, I don't really buy into her interactions with Scott in this, and like their emotional moments together. She seems like a new character. Because not only is she older than how we've seen most of Cassie, but she's also a different actress than how we've most recently seen Cassie. And I think the youngest actor from these two movies had the best chemistry with Paul Rudd. So I'm not really getting all those emotional beats that I should be. Like, I understand narratively and plot-wise how it works, and so, it works in that sense, but emotionally it doesn't get as big of, I was tearing up when I was rewatching these movies the last couple days. There was no part of this that I felt super emotionally invested in between those two characters, because they just don't feel like father and daughter like they have in other movies. And I think a big part of that is because it's a new actress for no reason. There's the best explanation I've seen as to why they recast Emma Furman, I think is her name, from Endgame, is that they wanted a bigger actress. But like, that's a dumb reason, and the MCU was built on unknown actors, and why is that necessary? Like, Cassie's got a big part of this movie, but it's not like she's the linchpin that this movie revolves around. That's Kang and Scott and Janet. Cassie's like, at most, fourth most important. So that's all kind of weird. But, sorry, I got way off track there. Huge tangent. Scott's Uneventful Life. I've heard other people saying that like, yeah, Cassie's right. It's weird that he's not doing anything. I don't think it is. I think that's very much in his character as someone who's been in prison, as someone who's had his life threatened, his family's life threatened, his friend's life threatened, his daughter's life threatened, who's literally helped save the world. And like, I know they joke about it in this one, but like, literally the time travel was his idea. It's not that he was just part of this big team that defeated Thanos. If it were not for him, the blip would never have been undone. And as he even points it out, that, oh, I'm sorry, you're all not dusted anymore. But it's like, yeah, take credit for that, man. So like, even though it's not the most superhero mindset, I can totally understand that he's just like, I just want to chill. I just want to have people like me and know who I am and get some free coffee and go through my day without anyone trying to kill me. I can believe that. Cassie in jail, I already talked about that. Skipping way ahead into the quantum realm with the probability storm. I liked that quite a bit. I thought it was a little weird how there was just like the one of him that was in the Baskin-Robbins uniform. Like, that was fine, that was funny, but like, why weren't there more versions that were just in different clothes? That seems kind of weird. I like how he, acted like the ants when they were all trying to get to save Cassie, right? And how that united them. I loved all that. I don't understand why all of them suddenly disappeared when he connected with Hope. Is it because then the storm was over? Or I didn't quite get that. But that was a neat scene. My last note on like the plot stuff is the deal between Scott and Kang. Because it seemed like the movie tried to make it both ways. Because Ant-Man agrees to Kang's deal that he will give him the core in exchange for Cassie's life, right? And then Hank and Janet, I think both of them, right? They come to Scott when he's got the core, and they're like, you can't let him have that. And Scott's like, I know, I'm going to give it to him. He's got Cassie. And then Kang comes. And like, at that point, the deal is still on, right? Scott has not tried to keep the core away from Kang. And then Kang says something like, do I need to take it? Implying like, are you going to fight me for it, right? Which like Scott doesn't. Kang, he does go and take it. but Scott doesn't put up any kind of a fight. And then I don't remember exactly what Kang says at that point, but then it's like later on, right? After Scott like fights back, that Kang then says to kill Cassie, and then like Scott does this whole thing of like, we had a deal. And it's just like, at what point from whose end did that deal break? Does Kang think that the deal broke because Scott didn't literally give him the core? Kang had to take the core? Or, because I'm misremembering, was it just that Scott went on to attack Kang later, and so that's when Kang was like, okay, we're going to kill this kid now? Because it seems odd that Scott thinks that the deal should still be on after he's attacked Kang. Maybe I'm misremembering the order there, but it feels like both of them have two different versions of how that deal went down, and it's very unclear to me. And it wouldn't be that big of a deal, except for Scott keeps bringing it up. That we had a deal. And I'm like, do you think you held up your end of that deal? Because I don't think you do once you start attacking him. Alright, it's very strange, very weird. And like I said, that's it for my plot notes. I will add one more thing that kind of tangents off of the whole we had a deal thing. The scene where Giant Man, which like at first when they're falling and Scott grows super duper big and like catches Cassie, I was like trying to figure out in my brain. I'm like, is this the biggest that he's gotten? But it's like, no, because they're all still really small. So like he's Giant Man, but he's still small. That's kind of weird. But he comes in as Giant Man, and he's like, Kang, and Kang's like, get us out of here. Don't let him get to us, blah, 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 blah. And like, I don't know why, but I so badly wanted Scott to call Kang a coward, right? Because Kang has built up this image as, I'm the conqueror, I'm the best, I can beat anybody, I've defeated all these Avengers, yet he's trying to run away like a scared little puppy. And like, I feel like in that moment you would call him out on being a coward and force his hand, because then even if he leaves, even if he escapes, he's left behind this realm that all now see him as a coward, and he wouldn't want that. So I feel like you could really get in his head by just calling him out as a coward. That doesn't happen. It doesn't really matter. Like I said, it's not a big deal. It's just something that I would have wanted. And like, I'm going to take this pause to reiterate. I liked this movie. I'm nitpicking a lot, and I'm complaining about things because I think it could have been better, but I liked it just fine. So let me get into some comments that other people have talked about. I've heard people talk about the color and the color grading in this movie and how the lighting is flat. I don't really understand what most of that means. I didn't really notice anything that disruptive to me in the movie. Physically, the theater I was in had an open doorway behind me going into a hallway that had a light on. So, like, I was getting light coming around, and I was literally sitting in the movie for parts of it like this because it was so dark on screen. So maybe there was some weird visual stuff that I attributed to that light that in a properly lit or not lit theater, I might have noticed more. And, like, I did kind of, because Nando, on his Nando Cut video, was talking about the colors and how, Scott's bright red and Hope is yellow and Cassie is purple and you can't really see those colors pop. And like, I did notice that I didn't notice those colors popping, but like, I guess I don't really think that's necessarily the point. I think the growing and the shrinking is more the point. So like, I noticed it, but it didn't really bother me all that much. But like, Meso on the Weekly Planet, he said something along the lines of, I liked the movie, but every criticism of it I've heard I don't disagree with. And that's kind of where I'm at on the color thing, is that like, okay, yeah, I agree with you and you're right, and I do think it would have been better if the color popped more, but it didn't bother me that it didn't. What bothered me more is that Cassie doesn't have wings on her suits. Right? Like, if you've got an Ant-Man suit with no wings and a Wasp suit with wings, and you're going to make a new suit for a child, why not put wings on there? That seems like the safer option. Because there's the part where she's fighting MODOK and she falls, right? And almost falls to, which like, to a certain extent, it's like, I guess you could just grow until you're touching the ground and then you're not falling anymore. But like, why wouldn't you just give her wings? By the way, before I forget, since we're already in spoiler territory, and I know people have been saying that it's not a spoiler, because apparently he was in some trailers, but like, I didn't know MODOK was in this movie before I went and saw it, so I'm glad that was a surprise for me. We'll get to MODOK later. So that's the color, and then the other thing that Nano, and I just, I wrote it down, is that I'm not trying to like call these people out or anything, but Nano also complained about the way the Quantum Realm looks, and James and Meso on the Weekly Planet were talking about that too, and I'm just like, it's not a real place. So like, I can get people saying I don't like the way that it looked. It's not what I imagined. It's not what I had in my head. It's not what the microverse in the comics looks like. I get all that, but just saying it looks bad, like, it's not a real place. How can you say that they're doing a bad job of realizing a fictional place? I don't know. I thought it looked fine. I wasn't bothered by anything about it. If it had been more about exploring the quantum realm and learning more about it, I think maybe that criticism would hold more weight. But it's just the setting. It's just where they are. And I think the creatures there and the people there and the Kang of it all there is more important to focus on. So I don't want the background to be distracting. Dan Murrell talked about MODOK. I don't remember what he said about MODOK, but let's talk about MODOK. So I'm not like super knowledgeable about MODOK in the comics. I thought he looked bad. And it's one of those things where I don't think he was supposed to look good, but I also don't think he was supposed to look this bad. I think he was supposed to look silly, and he kind of looks silly, but he mostly just looks bad. It didn't bother me a lot that I thought he looked bad, because they don't take him seriously. He's very much a joke character. He has a joke ending. People make jokes at him and about him. So, like, if they had taken him way more seriously as this serious antagonist, it would have bothered me more how bad he looked. But because they don't, even though I think he looks worse than he should, and like, I don't think it's intentional how bad he looks. I think it's just bad. It's not breaking to me. Like I said, it bothered me, but not enough to ruin the movie for me. But the other big thing I hear people talk about with MODOK is that, they wasted the character, blah, blah, blah. You can have more MODOKs, right? We're dealing with a multiverse, so you can have more MODOKs that are Darren Cross, and you can have more MODOKs that aren't Darren Cross. And, like, MODOK has had different acronyms in the comics, so you can have different versions of MODOK that are a different acronym, that spell different words, that do different things. And some of them can be comic accurate, and some of them can be changes from the movie, and some of them can be wild, right? And you can do that. So the people that are saying they wasted MODOK, I'm like, do you not understand how the multiverse works? Speaking of Darren Cross, I swear, I'm not trying to like be like, oh, I saw it coming, I'm so smart, but like literally in the movie before MODOK showed up, just kind of, I don't know why it popped in my head. I was trying to remember what happened to Darren Cross in the first movie, right? And I don't know what in the movie sparked that thought, or if I was just kind of bored in that moment, but I was trying to figure it out. What happened to Darren Cross in the first movie? Did he die? Like, Ant-Man went into his pack, and I don't remember what happened to Darren, because all I remember is that then Ant-Man was in the quantum realm, and then he came back. Did they just arrest Darren? What happened with Darren Cross? And then, like, I had that whole thought process in my head, and then I moved on, and I got back into the movie, and then later on, MODOK shows up, and it's Darren Cross, and then it has the flashback that shows what happened. I was like, huh, Okay, there we go. So that was kind of interesting. And like, I don't mind that they made it Darren Cross. I don't mind his little arc that he had. I thought all that was fun. I just think he looks stupid, and specifically unintentionally stupid. I think he looks worse than he was supposed to. So those are my thoughts on MODOK. Dan also said that this movie is too much of a setup. It sets up too much future movies, which is a common criticism of a lot of these MCU movies. But I remember when the first Ant-Man movie came out, after Age of Ultron, and the only reference it had to the Avengers was Hank Pym saying they're probably too busy dropping cities out of the skies. And people complained that it didn't connect enough to the other movies. And I remember when Ant-Man and the Wasp came out, and Infinity War had just come out, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, how are they going to explain what happened? And then it didn't. And people were like, wow, it doesn't even talk about what happened, it's just ignoring it. So, that's not to say that you can't feel one way or the other about that, but the point I'm trying to make is that someone's always going to be upset. Either it's not going to connect enough, or it's going to connect too much. And we had 2 movies where people said it didn't connect enough, and now we have this movie where it connects and people are saying that it connects too much. So, like, sorry, I don't mind that it connects because I watch all of these movies and all of the shows. And I'm into this as a franchise, and I understand that's how these movies work because that's how comic books work. So, like, again, not to say that you can't feel that way, but I don't think that's an objective criticism of the movie because the opposite has been a criticism of other movies. I think it's a fine subjective criticism, but objectively, it's like, yeah, these movies tie together. You should know this by now. This should be your baseline expectation by now. Let's talk about the Wasp. I was going to talk about characters later, but the Wasp in particular, a lot of people are talking about, and this is another criticism that I generally agree with, which is that the Wasp doesn't really do much in this movie. And, like, the Wasp has always been the second fiddle here in all of these movies. And I can't remember who mentioned it, but, like, the idea that this should have just been called Ant-Man quANTuMAnia. But you keep and the Wasp in there because the second one was called Ant-Man and the Wasp. So it feels like if you take her out, it's going backwards. But, like, she's not a main part of this movie. But when you put her name in there, people expect her to do it. But it's like, it's this weird thing where the main... Do I have my water here? I need a water. Drink more water. Hold on. The main female lead of this movie is Janet. And, like, Janet was a Wasp. So you could almost do this thing where it's like Ant-Man and the Wasp, but Scott Lang Ant-Man and Janet Van Dyne Wasp. But, like, they don't play into the idea that she was the Wasp. Even though when Hank finds her, she's got her wing, right? And it's like, what was she doing with that? Was she using that as a weapon? That's cool, but we don't see any of that. None of the creatures who know her or know of her or have heard of her in the quantum realm call her Wasp. They all call her Janet. And it's like, you could have just tweaked the story so that she calls herself the Wasp because when she went to the quantum realm, she was in her Wasp suit. And why wouldn't you just keep wearing that in a strange land? So you could have very, very easily just played up the fact that she is the Wasp. And then the title makes more sense. But they don't do that. And, like, even in the credits, she's just credited as Janet. And she's not credited as the Wasp. So, like, very strange. And I think, I'm like I said, I'm going to do a whole nother video on, like, an alternate version of this movie. But, like, I almost would have called it Ant-Man's and the Wasp's quANTuMAnia and really play up the fact that you've got Ant-Man and the Wasp of 2 different generations leading into can't see who they never... I took my brother to see this movie, my little brother, and I was literally telling him on the way there, I was like, I know that sometimes she's called Stature in the comics, but I know she's also got another name, and I can't remember what the other name is, but I don't think they're calling her Stature in this movie. I think they're using the other name. So maybe we'll see what her other name is in the movie, right? And then we go, and they never call her anything in the movie other than Cassie. So they were coming out of the movie, and I'm like, well, I have to look it up. Maybe they said it and I just didn't recognize it, right? Because it was whatever. And I looked it up, and it's Stinger. And I'm like, well, she's definitely not Stinger in this movie, because not only does she not have wings, but she doesn't have any kind of stinger, unless you count blasts, which I can't remember. I guess she probably does some blasts. I mostly remember her just running away. But she becomes giant at one point, so I was like, is it Giant Girl? Is that her other name? And I'm pretty sure there's a character called Giant Girl, but apparently it's not her, because that's not listed under her aliases on Wikipedia. So, like, tangent off of a tangent, I'm sorry. But, like, play up the multiple generations, because that's something interesting about this movie that not all the other movies have, right? Like, you're getting a little bit more of it now, but with, like, Black Panther, and even Thor having a kid, right? But, like, there's not multiple generations of Spider-Man in the MCU yet, and, like, we've got Iron Man and Rhodey and Ironheart, but, like, that's not really the same thing, and you kind of got something similar with the Marvels, but not really, and so it's just, like, that could be a very unique thing that, like, not only do they not fully, but, like, it barely even address it. So, yeah, like, obviously, best case scenario, Wasp has more to do, right? And it's like, I mean, bring back the one-shots. I know they're doing these special presentations now, which are just like a longer one-shot. Fine, call it whatever you want. We need to see something about the Wasp, absent Scott Lang, because we don't have any of that. We have no idea what she's... again, I think it was Meso on the Weekly Planet. He was like, you get the idea that between movies, Scott Lang is doing stuff. But you get the idea that between movies, Wasp is just standing around waiting for the next movie to happen. So, yeah, ideally she'd have more to do. I think we should see something of just her, just the Wasp, not a full movie, because then people will be like, well, where's Ant-Man? Not that I think you can't have a Wasp movie. I just think with everything else, they're not going to throw that in also. But just give us something, just a Wasp adventure on her own, and let us see who who Hope is, aside from the science, right? What does she do in her free time? And, like, this is, again, another tangent off of a but just, like, we don't really know what Hope's relationship is to Cassie, or what Hope's relationship is to Maggie, which, like, I guess that's less important. But, like, at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp, we see the three of them, Scott and Hope and Cassie, in the little Hot Wheels car at the drive-in, watching the big computer screen. So that's, like, something. And then at the end game, we see Scott and Hope and Cassie, like, out on the porch of Cassie's house, which I guess she still lives with Maggie, right? Because she's not 18 yet. But it's just like, how close are they? That's not ever made clear. And it's just like, I feel like we should at least know that much about Wasp. Of how close she is to, not the main character of this movie, but, like, the character that this movie's climax revolves around is Cassie. And we just don't. We know very little about Hope. And, in the first movie, she was, like, doing this double bluff. So it made sense that we didn't really know that much about her, but then we still don't in the Wasp, and then we still don't now. And it's weird. She's been in 4 movies now, and we know very little about her. And she's a title character. What does this say? The framing device and voiceover. So, I didn't mind the voiceover at the start that was leading into him reading his book, right? I thought that was fine. But then you get it at the end again, and I'm like, he didn't write another book, did he? Like, what? Who is he talking to? Because most of the time, oh gosh, I don't want to say something that's wrong on the internet, but most of the time in the MCU, if there's a voiceover, it ends up being somebody talking to someone else. Right? That's what Iron Man 3 was. It was Stark talking to Banner. We have stuff in Black Panther where we see uh, the vibranium showing the origin, right? But it's Killmonger's dad telling him the story. And then the beginning of this one, it's Scott Lang reading this book. So most of the time when we have voiceover, even Thor Ragnarok starts with voiceover, but it's him talking to a skeleton. But like Scott's not talking to anybody at the end of this. So why do we have this voiceover? It's weird. It's strange. I didn't mind like the jokes, right? Of like, did we do the wrong thing? Did we ruin everything? No, it's probably fine. Like I was fine with all that. Just the voiceover itself was weird to me at the end. And then so Dan Murrell talks about how he would have thought it was more interesting at the end if Scott and Hope had gotten stranded in the quantum realm, because Scott's in there, he's fighting Kang. Hope comes back to help him. The portal closes, and they're like, okay, they beat Kang, but now they're stuck here. And then immediately Cassie opens the portal up again, and they go back in. And I agree with Dan. I think it would be much more interesting moving forward at the end of this movie if they are separated, if they are stranded. And then you've got Cassie on the outside who wants to get Scott back, and you've got Janet and Hank who want to get Hope back. And like, obviously Janet's not going to be thrilled about going back to the quantum realm and giving another opportunity for Kang to escape, but she wants her daughter back. And so you'll have this collision of ideologies where Cassie just wants to get Scott back as soon as possible, and Janet is like, we're going to do this, but we got to do it in the right way. We can't risk Kang coming up. I want Janet back too, right? Or I want Hope back too, but we got to be careful. And then Michael Douglas kind of in the middle, the go-between, where he's like, he's her husband, but he's her... I guess he's not her grandpa, but like, he's kind of like her grandpa now, right? I mean, Scott and Hope aren't married. But I don't know how close Cassie is to Hope. But she's been doing all this work with Hank. It seems like Hank's her grandpa, but he's not. This is weird. Hope needs more to do in these movies. But I do think that would have been a more interesting ending. And like, again, I'll save this for its own video. But what I think would have been more interesting in this movie is to have one or two groups inside the quantum realm, but another group outside the quantum realm, and split up the characters differently. We didn't get Luis or Kurt or Dave, which we're not going to bring back T.I. You can look that up if you want to. I'm not going to talk about it here. But we can still have Luis and Kurt, which the guy that played Kurt, I know he was in this movie. He played the voice of the slime guy, but he's good with computers, right? So let's use that. And so I'm just to pair up, Luis with Hank, right? Without Scott there as the go-between. That could lead to some funny but also very interesting scenarios. And Hank could be faced with I'm talking about this too much. I need to save this for its own video. But it would have more characters, and so you would have enough to have two separate groups within the quantum realm, one group outside of the quantum realm, but it would be more strange mixing of the characters. Whereas in this movie, it's just the Pim Van Dynes and the Langs. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Jeremy Johns talked about Kang, and we get into this idea of multiple Kangs, and other people. I didn't write everything down that everybody that I watched said. So other people were talking about the Kangs also. And a lot of people are talking about this idea of why did they kill off this Kang? This was a really interesting Kang. I wish they didn't kill him off. And it's just guys, it's the multiverse. The multiverse exists and time travel exists. There's absolutely every possibility that this version of Kang, as well as several other versions of Kang, will return. right? And like, I'm not saying that I want that to happen or that that should happen. I was fine with this Kang dying because I understand that it's a multiverse and you will have a bunch of different Kangs. And like, people liked the one in Loki. And then that one died. And then people liked this one. And then that one died. And people were like, quit killing. And it's like, but we're going to get more. But like, even if I like those ones better and I wanted more of them, they can totally do that. Because time travel. And so now, I've seen some people asking, is the Victor Timely that's at the end of this, is that Kang, but previously in time? I don't know or care. It doesn't matter. There's a movie called The Kang Dynasty, guys. We're going to get more Kangs. What else we have? Callbacks. Oh, this is my note. So this starts my notes now. As I was rewatching Endgame before going to see quANTuMANia, but like not a small part of, but part of what made that movie so great for me personally was just the huge number of callbacks and references to older movies, and like not in a nostalgia bait type way, and not like just to put, but like things like Cap saying "on your left" or Falcon saying "on your left" to Cap, and things like Cap calling Spider-Man Queens because they've met and they've had that interaction before, and Cap holding the hammer and Thor being like, "I knew it," and Wasp calling Cap, and Scott giving her a little look. Like all these things that like they don't distract from the movie, they don't take away, they're not just shoved in there. They work, they fit organically, but also they show how much these filmmakers know and love the previous material. And like we don't get a whole lot of that in this. And it feels like you could have had more. So like the only two I could identify were stuff with Darren Cross, right? So you bring back the villain from the first one, and you have him kind of have this interaction with Hope because they've been an item, and you have this interaction with Hank because they've had a relationship, and you have this interaction with Cassie because he threatened her life. And then the only other one is that Scott still calls Cassie Peanut, which like is fine, but like it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of other callbacks or references back. Obviously the van's not in this, but you could have done something with the La Cucaracha song, which they did in Endgame, right? And like without Michael Pena there, I feel like he could have brought up a lot more. But like you don't even reference any of Scott's friends. You don't reference the drumming. You don't reference the trick shots. Did they even do? They did a little bit with the magic when he's at the restaurant with Jimmy Woo and he like does up his credit card. But like that's a there and it's gone moment. So like I don't know. I just feel like there could have been more references and more callbacks to the other movies. I think the problem is that most of that should be with Cassie, and this actress wasn't in those movies, so it doesn't really work out. And then, like, as we've said, Hope doesn't have a whole lot of character development. You could have done some stuff, because like there is a bit where like Scott is teaching Cassie on the fly in the moment how to fight as an Ant-Man, and it's like kind of similar to what Hope was what Hank was telling him in the first one, where like you jump big, shrink through the keyhole, land big, and he's like jump and tap. But like you could have done a more direct 1-to-1 with him teaching her how to punch, like Hope taught him how to punch. Right? There are areas that you could incorporate things like that they just don't. And I looked it up. This is the same director as the first two, so it's not like a Thor Ragnarok situation where it's a new director that maybe hasn't seen the other ones. Like it's the same guy. So just like do more to build off of what you've already done. And then I wrote the missing cast, which I've already kind of talked about. Luis should absolutely be in this movie. Again, Dave, we can get rid of Dave, and like we can talk about it and how the blip might have affected that, with some of them getting dusted and some of them not. And maybe Luis and Kurt got blipped and Dave didn't. So Dave on his own maybe got into trouble, right? And so you can reference it, but like we don't want to have T.I. in the movie. That's fine. Jimmy Woo's there, but barely. But then there's no Maggie. There's no Paxton. And it's like, I get that they're secondary characters, but they're like a big part of Scott's character. And they're a big part of Cassie's character. And they're barely even mentioned in this. Jimmy Woo, he's there for a hot second. Sonny Birch, none of that gets picked up, which, like, fine. But, like, we'll come back to him in a second. And then Ghost, Ava, whatever her last name is, Star, and Bill Foster, who are, like, huge parts of the second one. Again, could have been very helpful here. And again, in my video that I'm going to talk about, that's an alternate version of this, Bill and Ava can very much be on their team in these different groups trying to solve this problem from 3 different angles. It's just wild to me that none of them came back, because Bill knows about this stuff. Right? Why is Bill and Ava now basically has had her life saved from Janet? Why are they not around or even mentioned? Going back to Sonny Birch, something that I've seen people complain about. I think it was mostly Dan Murrell in the whole, this movie is just building up for another movie with Kang, right? And it's just like, how much of that do people feel like it's just a build up for another movie because they know that Kang is going to be the villain in future movies, right? Because it, like in Ant-Man 1, yes, the stakes are smaller, but you still have a very dangerous man going after a very dangerous technology. There's no reason, right, that within that narrative, you wouldn't absolutely think that Darren Cross is going to cause havoc upon the entire world, right? But nobody thought that Darren Cross was going to be the main recurring villain moving forward, so no one cared, right? And then we get to Ant-Man and the Wasp, and it's like Sonny Birch has these mysterious contacts. There's no reason that within the narrative, those contacts couldn't be highly, extremely powerful people. And like, I know is Ava going to be in the Thunderbolts? I can't remember if Ava's going to be in the Thunderbolts movie. She might be back though. But, you know, my point is, I don't think they devote any more time or energy to developing Kang in this movie than they did to the other villains in the other movies. It just seems like more of a setup for future movies because we know that he's going to be a villain in other movies. But, like, he's still the villain of this movie. He would still need to be set up and explained for this movie. So I don't understand why people have such a problem with that. I've got less than 10 minutes before my camera kicks me off. So let me quickly talk about some characters. Scott in this, I talked about in my last video about the other Ant-Man stuff, that in the first 2 Ant-Man movies, I thought Paul Rudd struggled with some of the emotional stuff. But I said I didn't think it was actually Paul Rudd. I think it was like the direction or something. I thought that was way better in Endgame. I think he nailed it in this one. I believe that he cares about Cassie and things like that. So I thought that was good. I've already talked about Hope. Hank doesn't do a whole ton in this other than the stuff with the ants. And again, I've seen people complaining about the ants coming in at the end, but like they totally set that up. And I know people say that it wasn't very much screen time, but like he like basically looks to the camera and says, I've got super smart ants that can help us out of some situations now. It's like, how do you not expect that to come back? That's Chekhov's ants. Of course they're going to come back. And then they even give you another hint later in the movie about like, oh, the ants are here and they're talking about it. And there's this whole line about like, are there any ants in the quantum realm? And Hank's like, I don't think so. And you're like, but there are now because they came down with them. So like, I wasn't surprised by that at all. Literally in that scene, in the big fight scene, I was like, okay, this is the moment where something's going to come over the horizon, right? And then the ants show up. And I'm like, oh, right, the ants. Like, that didn't bother me at all. Janet, like I said, you should have made her more Wasp. Why would you not make her more Wasp? Cassie, like I said, I thought she did fine. It's just the chemistry doesn't work as well because we haven't seen this actress with these characters before. She also should have wings on her suit. Maybe that'll be an element moving forward, right? So maybe she's stature in this one, but she's like, no, I need some wings. And then she becomes Stinger later. I don't know. Veb, the little slime guy, voiced by the dude that played Kurt. Love him. I love Well, I asked my brother what his favorite part of the movie was after we left, and he said he didn't know. And I said, mine is when the guy gets holes, and then he's like, "Rah!" and he starts eating people. Thought that was hilarious. Gentora, fine. The rebellion leader. Quaz, also fine. We have more than 7 holes, right? I mean, I don't know what. Maybe he's we've got more than 7 holes. Lord Krylar, Bill Murray, fine. I think he served his purpose. And then I've already talked about Kang and MODOK. So yeah, not a whole lot else for me to say about this in this video. But like I said, I will have a separate video about kind of not like fixing this movie, but just like a totally different way to approach this movie that I think would be more enjoyable and more connected back to the other ones. But is 10 minutes enough? I don't know. Let's explore the idea. Is this movie the most... is this trilogy the most consistent trilogy? So first of all, let's talk about the non-trilogies, right? So Shang-Chi is a one-off. Black Widow is a one-off. Incredible Hulk is a one-off. So we're not talking about those. Black Panther only has 2. Captain Marvel, the second one's coming out, so they're not enough. Guardians of the Galaxy, third one's not out yet, so we can't talk about it. And Doctor Strange only has 2. So those are out of the conversation. Let's talk about the ones that have 4, right? So Thor has 4 movies. Not a trilogy, but even if we ignore Love and Thunder, I don't think anyone would argue that these movies are consistent. This one has a totally different vibe from this one, which has a totally different vibe from this one. So, again, not saying best or worst, but not consistent. Let's do the other one that's got 4, which is Avengers. Again, I would say these aren't super consistent. Not even in terms of quality or anything, but just like this type of teaming up of 6 characters compared to this teaming up of 100 characters, like, it grows. This is maybe a contender, but for that reason, I don't think it's, this one's very much about, like, Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. and Loki, and this is just, like, the entire universe. Definitely a different scale. Iron Man, I'm one of the people that doesn't like Iron Man 3, but even if I did, like, it's not consistent with these 2. It's not consistent with him and his armor. It's not consistent with the storylines from 2 of his father and creating a new element. It just drops all those threads and instead picks up with his PTSD and stuff like that. So, again, not consistent. Spider-Man, I think, is the big contender here. But if we think about, like, the supporting characters, he's all about Liz in the first movie. And then Liz is dropped and it's MJ for the second 2. And it's like, yeah, that's just some growth. That's fine, but whatever. But then, like, his supporting, like, his backup, I guess. In the first movie, it's Iron Man. The second one, it's Nick Fury. And then the third one is Doctor Strange. Like, totally different, like, side heroes in all of those. And then, like, the setting. Like, this one's mostly at high school. This one's all over Europe. And then this one brings in the multiverse with multiple... Like, again, this isn't about good or bad. This is about consistency. So then, our last trilogy to talk about, Captain America, First Avenger, Winter Soldier, Civil War. Now, I love this trilogy, although I will say, this movie, the effects don't hold up. I don't know how long it's been since you watched it, but there's a lot of bad green screen in it. But, how's the consistency? I think the character of Steve Rogers is very consistent. The villains change, right? You got Red Skull in this one, and then you got Pierce, who's like, I guess still Hydra, but a different kind in this one. But then in this one, he's fighting the Avengers, so that's not super consistent. You've got Bucky as a consistent through line. But like your partners are different throughout. So he's got like the Howling Commandos in this one. This one he's got Black Widow and Falcon and like Maria Hill and that. And then this one, it's just other Avengers. So I love this trilogy a lot. I don't know how consistent it is though. But let's talk about the Ant-Man movies, okay? Ant-Man and the Wasp, Hank Pym, and Janet are all big parts of all of them. Cassie is a big part of all of them. The love interest doesn't change, right? He's after Hope the whole time. let's look at the villains. So you got Darren Cross in the first one. He's a bad guy that wants to steal the technology. Which, by the way, quANTuMAnia, if nothing else, there's no skybeam, and the ending fight is not just two guys in the same suit that are different colors. Yes, there is a faceless drone army, but, you know, hey, baby steps. Anyway, so Yellow Jacket in the first one, same guy after the, or bad guy after the technology of a similar suit. Hitman and the Wasp. You've got Ghost, who totally different set of powers. You've also got Sonny Birch, who's just like a political guy, but those both stem from Hank Pym, and even Darren Cross also stems from Hank Pym and Hank Pym hurting people. Then you get to quANTuMAnia, and it's Kang, but we've still got MODOK, who's a callback to Darren Cross, who has a big element of his character in this, that he still hates Hank Pym and Lang and them. But then Kang's motivation, I guess, for his hatred in this movie is directed toward Janet. So it's like you've still got this connection that this is all coming from the actions or inactions of Hank and Janet. So even though the villains are different, there's more consistency there than, you know, Captain America going from fighting Hydra to fighting the Avengers, or Spider-Man going from stopping the Vulture to stopping Green Goblin from another dimension, or Thor going from stopping Loki to what does he do in Ragnarok? Surtur, I guess. Hela. I mean, I guess those both come from Odin, but then you got the Dark World in the middle, which is Malekith, which also comes from Odin. So the villains are also a similar consistency in the Thor movies, but the tone of the movies themselves vary widely. So that's my little food for thought. Not best or worst, but is the Ant-Man trilogy the most consistent trilogy in the MCU? I'm going to say yes, and let you argue with me in the comics. But I need in the comments. But I need to end this video though, so if you're interested in my version of how I would have done this movie, that'll be coming up, I don't know when, soon, hopefully in the next couple days. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day. Drink more water. Goodbye.